Feel smart? JustProfessor here. You know other people have biases, but you think you're different. You can spot bias in everyone around you, but somehow you believe your own thinking is clear and rational. This blindness to your own biases has a name: metacognitive myopia. And it's the reason you keep making the same mistakes while thinking you're immune to the problems you see in everyone else. Imagine watching someone make an obviously biased decision. Maybe they're rejecting good evidence because it conflicts with what they want to believe. You can see their bias clearly. It's obvious to you. Now imagine someone pointing out your own bias in a different situation. You probably resist. You explain why your case is different. You have good reasons. You're not being biased. You're being rational. This is metacognitive myopia. You can see bias in others, but you're blind to it in yourself. Your brain has awareness of thinking in general, but lacks awareness of its own flawed thinking in the moment. Metacognitive myopia is when you lack awareness of your own cognitive limitations and biases, even though you can recognize them in others. You have a blind spot for your own blind spots. You can identify bias, irrationality, and flawed thinking when observing other people, but you can't see it operating in your own mind. You think you're the exception. Other people are biased, but you're objective. Other people are irrational, but you're logical. This blindness to your own thinking flaws is itself a cognitive bias. This happens because your brain doesn't have good access to its own processes. You experience the output of your thinking, the conclusions, beliefs, and feelings, but you don't see how you arrived there. You can't watch your own biases operating because they happen below conscious awareness. So you look at your conclusions, and they seem obviously correct because you can't see the biased process that produced them. Other people's thinking is visible from outside, so you can spot their biases. Your own thinking feels invisible, so it seems bias-free. The problem is metacognitive myopia makes you overconfident in your own judgments while being appropriately skeptical of others. You dismiss criticism of your thinking as people not understanding your situation. You do not learn from mistakes because you do not recognize them as mistakes. You explain them as bad luck or circumstances. You stay stuck in biased thinking because you can't see it to fix it. The very tool you need to improve your thinking, awareness of your own cognitive flaws, is exactly what metacognitive myopia takes away. Let me show you where this blindness operates. Political thinking shows metacognitive myopia perfectly. People easily spot bias in opposing political views. They see motivated reasoning, cherry-picked evidence, and emotional rather than logical arguments. But when it comes to their own political views, they believe they're being rational and objective. They have good reasons. They've thought it through carefully. The bias they criticize in others is invisible when they're doing it themselves. Scientific reasoning falls victim to this. Scientists can identify methodological flaws in studies supporting conclusions they disagree with, but they're much less likely to see flaws in studies supporting their preferred hypotheses. They think they're being objective and following evidence, not recognizing their own confirmation bias. Metacognitive myopia makes their own bias invisible while others' bias is obvious. Personal relationships demonstrate this. You can clearly see when your friend is making excuses for their partner's bad behavior or ignoring red flags. But when you're in a similar situation, you have good reasons for your choices. You're not ignoring problems. Your situation is different. Your partner isn't really like that. You can see relationship blindness in others, but not in yourself. Consumer decisions show metacognitive myopia in action. You recognize that advertising manipulates people. You know about marketing psychology. You see friends making irrational purchases based on advertising. But when you buy something, you believe you're making a rational choice based on real value, not recognizing that you were influenced by the same marketing that you see working on others. Driving behavior exemplifies this beautifully. Most people think they're better than average drivers. When you see someone driving poorly, you judge them as incompetent. When you make driving mistakes, you have explanations. Circumstances, other drivers, reasonable decisions given the situation. You can identify bad driving in others, but metacognitive myopia makes you blind to your own driving flaws. Intellectual debates reveal metacognitive myopia clearly. You notice when others are being defensive, refusing to consider alternatives, or rationalizing rather than reasoning. But when you're in a debate, you believe you're being open-minded and rational. Their defensiveness is obvious. Your defenses feel like legitimate arguments. Feedback resistance is driven by metacognitive myopia. Someone gives you critical feedback. You can recognize that people often get defensive and reject valid criticism. You've seen others do this. But when it's feedback about you, it feels different. You're not being defensive. You're explaining why the feedback is wrong or doesn't apply to your situation. Your defensiveness is invisible to you. Learning and improvement get blocked by metacognitive myopia. You can see when others aren't learning from experience or keep making the same mistakes. But your own patterns are invisible. You explain away repeated failures as circumstances rather than recognizing patterns in your own behavior that need changing. So, how do you overcome metacognitive myopia? How do you see your own blind spots when the problem is that you can't see them? First, assume you have all the biases. Start from the position that you're just as biased as everyone else. You can spot bias in others because it's there. The same biases are operating in you. You just can't see them as easily. This assumption helps counter the natural belief that you're the exception. Second, actively look for your own bias in situations where you judge others as biased. When you notice someone being defensive or using motivated reasoning, check if you do the same thing in similar situations. The bias you can see in them probably exists in you too. Use other people as mirrors for your own blind spots. Third, track your predictions and explanations. Write down what you expect to happen and why. Later, check if you were right. Notice when you explain away being wrong rather than updating your thinking. This external record helps you see patterns you can't see in the moment. Fourth, take criticism seriously even when it feels wrong. Metacognitive myopia makes valid criticism feel invalid, so adopt a rule. When someone gives feedback you want to reject, seriously consider that you might be experiencing metacognitive myopia. The criticism that feels most wrong might be the most accurate. Fifth, study cognitive biases deeply. The more you understand specific biases and how they work, the better you get at catching them in yourself. You'll never see them perfectly, but knowledge reduces metacognitive myopia by giving you frameworks to recognize biased thinking patterns. Sixth, ask others to point out your biases. Give people permission to call you out when they see you being biased, defensive, or irrational. Their outside perspective can see what you can't. This only works if you actually listen instead of explaining why they're wrong, which requires fighting metacognitive myopia actively. Seventh, practice intellectual humility. Treat your own beliefs and reasoning as potentially flawed. Hold positions loosely. Be willing to be wrong. This mindset doesn't eliminate metacognitive myopia, but it reduces the damage by making you less confident and more open to discovering you were wrong. Metacognitive myopia is the ultimate meta-bias. You're biased about your own biases. You can see cognitive flaws in everyone around you, but you're blind to the same flaws in yourself. You think you're objective while they're biased. You believe you're rational while they're emotional. You're convinced you're the exception to the cognitive limitations you observe in everyone else. This blindness is especially problematic because it prevents you from improving. You can't fix biases you don't see. You can't learn from mistakes you don't recognize as mistakes. You can't update your thinking if you believe your thinking is already sound. Metacognitive myopia creates a false sense of clarity that keeps you stuck in biased thinking while believing you're being perfectly rational. Understanding metacognitive myopia doesn't make you able to see your biases clearly. The blind spot remains, but knowing it exists makes you appropriately humble about your own thinking. It helps you take criticism more seriously. It makes you less confident in your conclusions and more willing to consider you might be wrong. The next time you spot obvious bias in someone else, remember that you have biases just as obvious that you can't see. The person you're judging probably thinks they're being just as rational as you think you are. That symmetry should give you pause. You're both experiencing metacognitive myopia. Neither of you can see your own biases clearly. The difference is whether you're aware that you can't see them. Your thinking is flawed in ways you can't perceive. Accept this. Work around it. Listen to others who can see what you can't. That's how you make progress despite the permanent blind spot of metacognitive myopia. Subscribe to learn more about the biases affecting how you think about your own thinking.